So e4 d6, right? This is an opening that I wouldn't recommend you to play too much, and I would recommend you to make this your like favorite opening, or the opening that you play every like all the time against e4, because I think this is a little bit too passive, you know. It's not to say that it's a bad opening or anything, it's just that it probably is not giving you the experience that you need to accumulate at this point, which should be something a little bit more classic, a little bit more fighting for the center from the beginning. So I would recommend you to change these seats, maybe to play something like just simply e5, or just to try to play a Carrero can or something like that. That's a little bit more solid, and which plans are a little bit better for the black pieces, if you will, because when you play these seats, it's a little bit too passive, I believe, and you should make this like your a part of your repertoire forever. So this is just like a transitional or things for a blitz. It's a little bit better for those kind of positions. Nonetheless, against e4, this seats not necessarily the best way to proceed, but nonetheless it's playable, I guess. So d4, knight f6 makes sense. Bishop d3, g6, alright, knight d2. So generally people will play something like knight f3, but I don't know, I just wanted to experiment a little bit here with knight d2 because I wanted to be able to play f4 in certain positions that could be interesting, or I just simply wanted to get into a more or less King's Indians position. And this is another problem that you have in these kind of situations when you play the Pirc defense, that you're getting into a more or less King's Indian position. And if you do not know how to play with the King's Indians, then this might be a problem, because you might find yourself lost and without plans, because you need to know a little bit more theory, right? So for example here, I was trying to transpose into a King's Indian, and actually I did after c4. See how this is not already this is not a Pirc anymore. This is more or less a King's Indian position. So now the plans that you play with the Pirc are probably not going to be so effective. In this position, you're going to have to play a King's Indian. So here, for example, c6 makes sense. Another move that's often played in King's Indians is e5. I believe it's something that you can play in this position, and then get into more or less similar plans to what is often played with a King's Indian. Maybe something like knight e8 eventually, or knight h5, and then try to push f5, knight d7, with ideas of playing a5 to play knight c5, so that your knight is not getting is not something that I can push away with moves like b4. It's possible. Also, another way to proceed to try to get a knight on c5, which is a really nice square, is a5 followed by knight a6 to play your knight to c5, for example, where it will have a really decent square to play from. For example, you'll be generating pressure on e4, you'll be generating pressure on d3. So those are some general ideas here, right? Also, another way to proceed with a Pirc, I mean, not with a Pirc, but with a King's Indian in these kind of positions, is to play something like c5, which is the other way to try to break. So the idea is that if I take here, then I guess this is a playable position for the black pieces, and if I do not play and if I do not play d takes c5, and if I play something like d4, d5, then what's happening is that you are generating a square to go to with your knight eventually, or to try to break with e6. So those are some general ideas of the King's Indian if you are playing this position, something that you should try to consider, right? c6 makes sense also in the King's Indian, but nonetheless, I guess the move here should be e5, d5, then c6, probably a5, knight a6, knight c5. Probably something like knight h5, and then try to break with f5 eventually. So that's one of the recommendations that I will give you in these kind of positions, but you have to be careful with this yourself, because you know, this is really deep. Actually, there are many variations, and there are many plans and ideas. I'm just giving you like the top of the iceberg, but there are so many different variants, right? And I believe that if you're a player of Pircs and of these kind of positions, King's Indians are something that you can try to adopt to your repertoire as well. So that's playable. So knight b c3. See how I'm not doing anything crazy. All my pieces are going out. My knight's going out through e2, my other knight to c3. I'm just solving the problems that I have in the position, right? Which is basically that I need to finish my development and to castle and to get my pieces out, right? You're doing the same thing to a certain extent, but nonetheless, see how in this position now, after h3, you're playing rook e8. And rook e8 is a move that I wouldn't recommend you to play in this position. So rook e8 is a move that looks natural, right? Like, alright, I bring my rook towards the center. But nonetheless, it doesn't go with the spirit of the position. How come? Because if you play rook e8 in this position, basically you are not having your rook on f8 anymore. And generally you want to have your rook on f8 so that you can push f5 when you are breaking the center. So what you want to do in these kind of positions is to play something like probably queen c7, e5, and then, or just simply e5 here in this position, wait to see what the white pieces are going to do against e5. If they play d5, then your plan should be something like knight e8 and then f5, try to break or something like that, or just simply a5 one more time, knight c5, and then try to break with f5. See how your rook is important there, because you want to break here. So it is stronger if your rook is on f8, pushing the pawn on f5, and that's even nicer for you. So one of the problems that I have in this position as the white pieces is that even though it is a King's Indian, the problem that I have is that my bishop is on d3, you know? Like here in this position, here, let's say after e5. The problem that I have is that my bishop is on d3, and I don't want the bishop to be on d3. Another problem that I have is that my knight is on e2. So generally in this kind of positions, something that you'd like is to have your bishop on e2 and your knight on f3. And the plan is something like this. You're gonna push d5, right? And what you want to do is to move your knight from f3 to e1 and then to d3, so that you are pushing moves like c5 and you're breaking on the queen side, right? That's something that we try to do in this kind of positions with the white pieces, right? So as I have my bishop on d3, this is not so clear, and my knight on e2 is not so clear. So I would have to consider what to do in this kind of positions. Maybe f4 to try to break soon. So those are like my plans. See how I'm just throwing some ideas, but nonetheless they are based on the general concepts that you'll find in King's Indians. So this bishop on d3 is kind of dubious. It also gets a little bit trapped. So I thought, well, whatever, I have to play the position, but at least I have the option to play f4. So see how many things I'm thinking here, but you're just simply moving your pieces, right? And that's a problem. You have to sit down here, even since, since this position, even a little bit before that, and think what do you want to do with your pieces, and what's the most harmonious position that you can aspire to. Because if you don't do that, then what's going to happen is that your pieces are not going to be working together as a team, but they're just going to be all over the place, right? So
the thing is, I did this move because I knew I had to develop my pieces, but I didn't think the way you thought, and I realized that I wanted to develop my knight here, but I felt like after you advance your pawn, I wouldn't have any like good squares to move my knight.
Exactly.
So so I guess I did the rook move for lack of a better developing move.
Exactly. But now nonetheless, you're exposing yourself a little bit more to a paradigm which is a little bit more correct in these kind of positions. So now you know that for the next games that you play in this kind of positions, something that you can try to aspire to is to play e5, and then your knight has to go to c5 generally. If the guy plays something like d5, right? But nonetheless, you cannot just wait forever till to try to break the center, because that might be a problem. Eventually, if the white pieces play too actively, then you'll find yourself a little bit constrained. So I guess rook e8 makes sense, but nonetheless, it's not so accurate, right? So rook e8, bishop e3, e5, right? e5 is a move that I like, but nonetheless, if I play d5, which is another move that I had in mind, then this rook on e8 was doing nothing, right? So it was kind of dubious. In this position, I decided to play something simple like queen d2. Nonetheless, I believe that the best move should be probably d5. Then against d5, one more time, just to refresh the idea so that you do not forget it, a move like a5 is something that you should consider, so that you do not get like this b4s coming. So also something interesting to see with this a5 idea is that if, for example, I play a3, so that, you know, I am pushing b4 anyways, so that if you take, I take, and then suddenly your knight has to go backwards. Something that you can try to place a move like this one. Of course, in this position, not, because you'll be losing a pawn. But this is a move that's characteristic of these kind of positions. And the idea is that if I play b4, now you take en passant. And what's happening is that you cannot simply get rid of the knight on c5. So that's another idea that you could have in mind. Also, some people would play, instead of c6, in this kind of situation, something like keeping the pawn on c7 sometimes, so that they can push b6 and the knight is a little bit more defended on c5. That's another idea that could happen. So bishop e3, e5, queen d2, pawn takes, makes sense. Knight e5. And here in this position, this knight e5 is something that you have to be careful with, because it's one of those moves which looks really nice, but nonetheless you have to have a plan, because if not, then I simply move my bishop backwards. See how my bishop is dominating your knight. Whoops.
Yeah.
because it has no squares to go to, and then I'm also pushing f4. So basically I'm getting rid of your knight here, and I'm also pushing bishop f3 once I play f4, and this bishop is in a really decent diagonal, it's defended on e4, bringing my rooks out, so that might be dangerous, right?
Yes.
In this position, knight e5 is a move that you have to consider, but nonetheless you have to be really careful with these kind of positions, because if you simply play knight e5, then that might be just helping me. Remember that whenever a knight is 2 squares away from a bishop, it is being basically dominated, right? So in this position, this knight does not have a lot of squares to go to. Maybe a way to proceed would have been to play knight c5 one more time. I know that sounds a little bit obnoxious right now, because we have heard that a lot, but nonetheless, see how the knight here would be attacking the pawn on e4 with his other knight and with his rook, and there might not be moves like f4 to try to get rid of the knight like immediately, right? So for example, a move like knight c5 would make me react to this to defend this pawn on e4. For example, maybe a move like f3 could come, and then you can play a5 to stop this b4. So that's an idea, right? See how, one more time, all has to do with the King's Indians positions and how to work with them. So in this position, this could be an interesting idea. Also see how, as I'm playing f3 to defend my pawn on e4, I'm not playing f4 to take more control in center. So those are some ideas that we have in the position. For example, in this position, when you're playing knight e5, that's telling me that you do not have a clear plan in the position and that you are not so clear on what to do here. So what do we have to do to find the plan? I say this a lot: evaluate, right? How does it work? We sit down here, we say, well, what's happening with every single one of the pieces? What can I do with my pieces? What can I do with my pawns? What can the other guy do with his pieces and his pawns? And how should I basically play in a position to get rid of my problems and increase yours? That's basically what it is, right? I would send you a link to a video with these characteristics so that you get it better, but it's just not to repeat it the same thing all the time, right? So knight e5, kind of dubious, right? Because after bishop e2, the knight looks really nice, but now it is a problem for you because I'm pushing f4. c5. And now, this is a move that I don't like. How come?
I don't know. Because I guess, I don't know, you can move your knight here? I don't know.
All right.
I don't know. I thought it was a good move because that way, I don't know why. Why is it a bad move?
All right. It is a problem because you're basically leaving yourself with a backward pawn. So this is a backward pawn, and basically what's happening is that it is not a pawn which is protected by other pawn.
Oh, right.
And at the same time, it is in this file which is gonna be taken advantage of, right? This pawn cannot advance.
I spent a lot of like temples like trying to defend this pawn.
Exactly. So this pawn is not defended by any other pawn. That means that it has to be defended with pieces, right?
Yeah.
That means that your pieces are gonna have to go backwards, right, and adopt a defensive position, a passive position, to try to not lose the pawn, basically, right? So that's a problem that you have in this position. So see how afterwards you were paying for it. In this position here, that's one of the problems that you have, because if you play c5, then see how suddenly all the pieces are going after this pawn on these sits. So I have a knight, I have a queen, I have a rook, everybody's coming here to generate pressure on these sits. You haven't finished your development, whereas I just finished mine, and I'm pushing moves like f4 at the same time. Things are starting to look really, really difficult for the black pieces. Even though c5 is a move that looks like you are trying to fight for the center, actually in a deeper level, what you're doing is that you are debilitating your position. So you're giving me something to attack, basically. And that's something that you cannot allow yourself to do in these kind of situations, because if you do that, then I'll just see the weakness and go for it with all my pieces, and then you'll be losing some material eventually. So also something interesting to see is that this is a position that looks a little bit like Amaroxy. Have you seen Amaroxy before against the Sicilians?
No.
No? Amaroxy is basically when you play c4 and e4 against a Sicilian, and the plan or the basic idea is that you have these two pawns defending on d5, which is the square where the black pieces want to break generally in this kind of position. So see how the liberating move for you would be something like d5. But nonetheless, you cannot do that because there are too many pieces defending the square d5. So that could be dangerous for you. In this kind of position, something that we have to see is that against a Maroczy, generally playing something like this or playing something like e5 and basically giving away the square d5 is really annoying for your position because you're giving me an outpost to put pieces on. And if I get to do that, then my pieces are going to be really active. So that's another problem that you have in these kind of positions. Maroczys are really interesting positions to study. You'll see that generally what you want to do with the black pieces is to play d5. And often if you cannot do that, you'll try to wait a little so that you have the opportunity to do that. Otherwise, you leave yourself with structural problems and it might not be the best way to proceed. So in this position, what you have to take or what you have to see is that if you're pushing this pawn to c5, this pawn on d6 is going to be really, really, really weak. So here at least, it is not so obvious how to exploit it. But if you give me this square to go with my knight, this is going to be really hard for you. So c5, dubious, right? Backward pawn, things are starting to look a little bit hard to play. So knight bd5, knight dv5. Bishop f8, your pieces are going backwards. See how this bishop, which was in a really decent diagonal, now is on one of the most passive diagonals that you can find. It is trapped behind its own pawn structure. And you're not thinking about these kind of things when we were playing the game, right? So you were not thinking about this. And this is something important. Because in this position, you're losing activity, right? And I believe it has to do with you playing a little bit too fast without concentrating on every single aspect of the board, but just reacting to the moves of the other guy. This is something important for you. You should see what you want to do with your pieces and what you want to avoid with your pieces. If I were you in this position, I wouldn't like to move my bishop to f8 because then see this bishop, which was beautiful here. Now it is a bishop which is doing not that much, right?
Okay.
If anything, you're just simply going backwards, and that's something that.
So would you suggest I like just give up this pawn? Like,
no, I mean,
how would you suggest I proceed?
I mean, I was suggesting that in this position, you should see that if you play c5, then everything is just coming backwards, and everything is just starting to look a little bit more desperate and passive, right? So it's not to say that here, well, now that you have committed the mistake, you have to try to figure out a way to defend. And if you cannot find a way to defend, then maybe you should try to give away the pawn and fight for some counterplay, as you said afterwards. But nonetheless, it was too late when you say that. See how in this position, after I play knight b5, you cannot only see that, or you shouldn't just see that I am playing knight b5 to take the pawn on d6 and that bishop f8 is the answer. You should also see that rook is coming to d1 and generating even more pressure. You should also see that f4 is coming. And all of those things together, right? Why? Because, wow, that's dangerous, right? If you cannot stop that, well, maybe you should just give away the pawn in certain instances. This might be one of the cases, but the problem is that if you give away this pawn, this is also falling. So see how structurally this is not working pretty well for you. So c5, not a good move. Really important to remark. And in this position, maybe a better move would have been simply to play something like, I guess, queen c7. But even that, I mean, the idea with queen c7 is that if I play f4, then you go backwards. And, well, it doesn't look like the best position ever, right? But I guess it's playable. And in this position, for example, well, you can try to figure out a way to get your pieces out. For example, your bishop on c8, which is one of your bigger problems here, or your biggest problems here. You should try to get it out somehow. But this is one of the problems of the Pirc by itself, you know, that you get into these positions which seem to be a little bit passive and the white pieces take the control of the center, something that I don't like that much. So, c5, bishop f8, rook a d1. See how I'm not doing anything crazy from the beginning of the game. I'm just solving the problems that I have. The developmental problems that I had, I'm just controlling the center, then I'm just simply bringing my pieces out. Here I retreat because I don't want to give you the pair of bishops, and also I want to dominate your knight. I'm bringing moves like f4 to take even more control of the center. Knight b5, bishop f8, now finally you generate a weakness. Now I concentrate my forces on the weakness that you have, and what I want to do is to break it and to basically transform this positional advantage of having a backward pawn into something material that I can try to use to win the game. Because you're not gonna resign just because you have a backward pawn, right? So I have to make this something material for me, or something tangible for me. And the way to do that is basically to take the pawn, and then I'll be a pawn up and I have the control of the center, and eventually this is gonna be transforming itself into something bigger and bigger, and the position should be winning, right? So bishop f8, rook, and here rook e6. See how this move, rook e6. I mean, I guess it's probably the only move to defend on these hits, but no. This rook e6 is just simply allowing me to play f4 with even more intensity, pushing these two pawns, and this is just gonna be too much, right? So see how now you have to pay the consequences of not seeing that c5 is a move that's basically deteriorating your position to a really giant extent, right? So e5 now, well, queen e8, knight c7, knight takes. This is just over.